I want you to try a thought experiment with me. It is a bit unsettling, but bear with me here. Imagine walking down a really busy street.
Like Fifth Avenue or something.
Yeah, exactly. Fifth Avenue, Oxford Street, Shibuya Crossing, wherever you want. You are surrounded by people, thousands of them. And every single one of them is, biologically speaking, the exact same make and model as you.
Which is something we take completely for granted today.
Yeah.
I mean, we live in a biological monoculture.
Right, we do. We're the only game in town. If you see something that looks kind of human but isn't quite human, it is either a mannequin, a robot, or, you need to get your eyes checked.
Yeah.
But what if that wasn't the case? Imagine a world where you aren't the only human species on the block. A world where, walking across the savannah, you might lock eyes with another being that is undeniably a person, but also undeniably not you.
It sounds like fantasy. Like Middle Earth or something out of a sci-fi novel.
Yeah.
But for the vast majority of our history, that was the reality. We were just one character in a very crowded cast.
And that is exactly the headspace we need to get into for this deep dive. We are dialing the clock back roughly 2 million years. We are in the Pleistocene epoch of the Cenozoic era.
A very different world.
Very different. The world is in flux, the climate is shifting, the landscape is changing, and there is a major changing of the guard happening in Africa. The era of Homo habilis, the handyman, that small, scrappy ancestor, is ending. And stepping onto the stage is something else entirely.
This is the pivot point. I always say if the history of humanity was a movie, this is the scene where the hero finally shows up. We were talking about Homo erectus.
The upright man.
The upright man. And that name, Homo erectus, it's not just a label for a bag of bones in a museum. It is a description of a revolution. This is the species that looked at the trees, looked at the ground, and made a permanent decision to conquer the horizon.
So we have a massive stack of sources today. We are looking at a very detailed transcript from a documentary on prehistoric humans alongside some incredibly dense archaeological records.
So,
Yeah, it's rich material. And our mission today is to reconstruct this creature. And I do not just mean measuring skulls. I want to know what it felt like to stand next to one. Because reading through these sources, Homo erectus feels like the moment the human operating system actually came online.
that is a great way to put it. Before erectus, you have hominids that are, well, they are interesting. The Australopithecines, Homo habilis.
Right.
But if you saw them, you wouldn't feel a kinship. You would see a clever ape. Homo erectus is the bridge. They are the ancestors who took the absolute first steps toward a life that we would recognize. They became more intelligent, more powerful, and significantly more successful than anything that came before them.
So let's start with the visual, because I really love this concept of the uncanny valley that the source material brings up.
Right, the uncanny valley. We usually talk about that in robotics.
Yeah, that creepy feeling you get when a robot looks almost human, but something is just slightly wrong.
Exactly. But in evolution, it works in reverse.
Okay, so let's run the simulation. I have a time machine. I grab a Homo habilis from 2.5 million years ago. I bring him to modern New York. I put him in a bespoke suit, and I set him loose on the sidewalk. What happens?
He stops traffic. Immediately.
Just completely stands out.
Completely. And not because he's handsome. Even in a tailored suit, the proportions are all wrong. He is short, maybe 3.5 or 4 feet tall. His arms are dangling down past his knees.
Oh.
And when he walks, it is not a stride, it's a shuffle. He's retaining those tree climbing adaptations. He looks like a bipedal ape trying to blend in. You would know instantly that is not one of us.
Okay, so the illusion fails immediately. Now I send him back. I grab a Homo erectus from, say, 1.5 million years ago. Same suit, same sidewalk.
Now you have a very different situation. If a Homo erectus walked past you in a rush, you might not even turn your head.
Really? You wouldn't notice?
Not from a distance. The silhouette is mastered. That is the key takeaway here. They are tall. The records show they range from about 4 feet up to 6 feet tall.
That is a massive jump in height compared to habilis.
It is a huge leap. And the arms have shortened to human proportions. The legs have lengthened for long-distance walking. The gait is fluid. They aren't shuffling anymore. They are striding. From the neck down, they are effectively us.
But if I stop him and ask for directions...
Then the illusion breaks. Once you look at the face, you are hitting that uncanny valley hard.
Let's map out that face then. Based on the fossils, what am I looking at?
You are looking at a face that is built for impact. The very first thing you would notice is the brow ridge. It is a heavy, solid bar of bone running straight across the eyes. We do not have that. We have separate eyebrows. This was essentially a bone visor.
And what about the top of the head, the forehead?
Almost non-existent. It slopes back aggressively. Our foreheads go straight up to house our massive frontal cortex. They're swept back. And the jaw is prognathic. It pushes outward. So the lower half of the face projects forward much more than yours or mine.
Kind of like a muzzle.
A flatter face than an ape, but definitely more projecting than ours. And depending on when we catch them in that 2 million year timeline, they were likely hairier than us too.
But there is one feature on the face that the source material highlights, and I think it is the most critical piece of engineering in the entire skeleton. And it is one we usually just ignore completely.
The nose.
The nose. I have to admit, when I read the source material, I stopped and thought, really? The nose? I always assumed a nose is just a hole to breathe through. Why is the shape of the nose such a huge deal for Homo erectus?
It is a total revolution in climate control. Look at Homo habilis, or a modern chimp. The nose is flat. It is basically just 2 holes on the face. That works perfectly fine if you live in a tropical rainforest where the air is warm and wet all the time.
Because your lungs need moist air.
Exactly. If you breathe in dry air constantly, it actually damages the lung tissue over time. Plus, you lose water every single time you exhale.
Okay, so in the jungle, the humid air basically does the work for you.
Right. But Homo erectus was leaving the jungle. They were moving out into the open savanna and eventually into deserts and temperate zones. The air out there is dry. If you have a flat ape nose in the arid savanna, you are going to dehydrate rapidly just by breathing.
So the projecting nose, the kind of beak that we all have, that is a humidifier.
It is a complex HVAC system right on your face. By having a nose that sticks out, you create a longer chamber inside the nasal cavity. And inside that cavity, you have these structures called turbinates.
Turbinates.
Yeah, they increase the surface area inside the nose. So when you breathe in, that harsh, dry air swirls over the moist tissues and gets humidified before it ever hits your delicate lungs.
That is incredible.
And it gets better. Even more importantly, when you exhale, that longer nose traps the moisture from your breath so you do not lose it to the outside world.
It is literally a moisture reclamation system.
It is. And that one single adaptation, that funny projecting nose, allowed them to leave the tropics. It completely untethered them from the rainforest. They could go anywhere.
That is wild to think about. It is totally distinct from the brain, but it seems just as important for their lifestyle. They were built to be travelers.
They were the ultimate travelers of the ancient world.
Yeah.
But we definitely cannot ignore the brain. That is the other side of the coin here.
Right. The upstairs renovation. Homo erectus had a significantly larger brain than habilis and the Australopithecines. But the source mentions something really interesting called the learning curve. It suggests that it wasn't just about having a big brain, but about how that brain grew over time.
This is a crucial distinction. You can have a big brain that is fully wired and ready to go at birth, or you can have a big brain that wires itself after birth.
Hardware versus software.
Exactly. In the early populations of Homo erectus, the fossil evidence suggests their brain development was really fast. They reached adulthood quickly, much more like a chimpanzee does today.
Which makes sense in a dangerous world, right? You want to be up and running and defending yourself as fast as possible.
Right. You do not want to be a helpless baby for 5 years when there are leopards roaming around your camp. But if you grow up too fast, your brain is rigid. You are basically running on instinct. As Homo erectus evolved, we see a massive shift in the later populations. They started delaying maturity.
They started having a childhood.
They essentially invented childhood. They traded that safety of fast growth for the extreme vulnerability of being helpless for a longer period.
Why would evolution favor that? It seems incredibly risky.
Because it keeps the brain plastic. It allows the child to absorb and learn from its environment, to learn complex social rules, to learn how to manufacture tools. You cannot hardwire the instructions for making a stone axe into DNA. It has to be taught.
So they were betting on intelligence over pure instinct.
They were betting that the community could protect the child long enough for that child to become a genius. And looking at their survival record, that bet paid off spectacularly.
It really explains so much about their success. But before they could conquer the world, they had to actually become a distinct species. And there is a bit of a mystery here regarding the family tree.
The muddle in the middle, as it is sometimes called in anthropology.
Yeah, because the old school chart, the one I had in my biology class on the wall, it showed a straight line. You have Homo habilis hunching over, then getting a bit taller, then suddenly becoming Homo erectus. Yeah. One just morphs into the other. But the sources note they actually coexisted for roughly 500,000 years.
Which completely destroys the straight line theory. You cannot be your own grandfather while your grandfather is still alive and living next door.
So how do you get a new species if the old one is still just hanging around?
The leading theory, and the one the source text really focuses on, is the isolation theory. Biologists call it allopatric speciation.
Okay, let's unpack that without the heavy jargon. How does that actually work in practice?
Picture a population of Homo habilis in East Africa. They're doing their thing, scavenging, sleeping in trees, surviving. Then, a major geological event happens. The Rift Valley is highly active. Maybe a volcano erupts and blocks a mountain pass, or a massive lake expands, or a strip of land turns into an impassable desert.
So a barrier forms.
Right. A small group of habilis gets entirely cut off from the main herd.
They are stranded on an island, essentially, even if it is an island on land.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this isolated pocket is going to be different. Maybe it is much drier there. Maybe the food is harder to catch or requires more running. In a massive continent-wide population, small genetic changes just get diluted over time. But in a tiny, highly stressed population, natural selection hits the gas pedal.
It is adapt or die.
It really is. If you are stuck in a dry, open area, the individuals who are slightly taller, who happen to have slightly better noses for retaining moisture, who have more efficient legs for running, they are the only ones surviving to breed. The short and shuffling genes get wiped out really fast.
So you get this hyper-accelerated evolution in a geographical pressure cooker.
Yes. And within a relatively short time, evolutionarily speaking, that isolated group has changed so much that they are no longer Homo habilis. They are officially Homo erectus.
And then what? The climate changes back?
Eventually, yes.
Yeah.
The barrier falls, the climate shifts back, or the lake dries up, and this newly minted Homo erectus walks out of isolation and spreads back across the continent.
And they meet their ancestors.
They meet them and likely outcompete them entirely, or they just ignore them, because by that point, Erectus was operating on a completely different level.
And they didn't just stay in the neighborhood. This is the part of the story that really blows my mind. Homo erectus were the first true explorers.
The first globetrotters.
Yeah.
Before them, being a hominid was a strictly African phenomenon. Homo erectus broke the container.
I am looking at the map of their conquest from the source material, and it is staggering. They cover almost all of Africa, except maybe the deep eastern Sahara. They move up into the Arabian Peninsula. They go all the way up to Turkey.
And that is just the gateway. They push deep into the east. We have concrete evidence of them in Pakistan, India, Malaysia, Thailand.
And China, the incredibly famous Peking man.
Yes, Peking man is Homo erectus. And they went as far as the Korean peninsula. But perhaps most impressively of all, they reached Indonesia. They got down to Java.
Java man.
Java man, dating all the way back to 1.5 million years ago.
Wait, let's pause on that. 1.5 million years ago. So they didn't just slowly wander over millions of years. They evolved and almost immediately started walking.
They were incredibly driven. And the Java discovery is crucial because to get to Java, even during periods with lower sea levels, you were dealing with water crossings. You were dealing with complex geography.
They had to cross the Wallace Line, or at least navigate treacherous archipelagos.
Right. And the source explicitly mentions teeth found in Java, suggesting this wasn't just a one-off accident where a few people floated on a log. There was a second wave of colonization hundreds of thousands of years later.
So people kept arriving. It was a sustained presence.
It highly suggests a consistent push, a real migratory instinct. And they went north, too. They crossed via the Iberian Peninsula through modern-day Spain and Portugal into Western Europe. We have specimens from France, England, southern Italy, Germany.
Think about the massive climate difference there. Going from the sweltering Rift Valley in Kenya to a freezing winter in Germany. That is not just a long hike. That is surviving on an alien planet.
It requires an unbelievable level of behavioral adaptability. And that is exactly why we see subspecies emerge. As they traveled all over the globe, they isolated again in new environments.
Oh, right, because the populations get separated by distance.
Exactly. So the Homo erectus we find in China, known as Homo erectus pekinensis, looked slightly different from the ones in Java, which are Soloensis, or the original ones back in Africa, often called ergaster.
Speaking of ergaster, the source brings up a big taxonomy fight about that name. Is Homo ergaster a completely different species from Homo erectus?
The classic lumpers versus splitters debate in paleoanthropology.
I have heard of this.
Yeah, it never ends. Some scientists, the splitters, want to split every minor skeletal variation into a brand new species. Others, the lumpers, want to group them together if the overall blueprint is the same. The source suggests the current consensus is leaning toward lumping. Homo ergaster is highly likely just the African subspecies of Homo erectus. So Homo erectus ergaster. It is the exact same animal. just with different regional adaptations.
Kind of like how a timber wolf and an Arctic wolf are both wolves, just adapted to their specific zip codes.
That is a very solid analogy. It really highlights how dominant they were. They weren't just surviving in one specific fragile niche. They were thriving in almost every niche on Earth.
But you cannot walk from Kenya to Germany with just your bare hands and a good attitude. We need to talk about their tech.
The toolkit. We are moving well beyond the Oldowan tools of Homo habilis here.
Oldowan tools are basically just smashed rocks, right? You hit a rock with another rock and use the sharp flake.
Pretty much. It is highly opportunistic. You need a sharp edge, you smash a cobble, you use the flake, you drop it. But Homo erectus developed the Acheulean industry.
Acheulean, what is the fundamental difference there?
The difference is the mind operating behind the hands. An Acheulean hand axe, that classic, beautiful teardrop shape, requires you to look at a raw, untouched lump of stone and see the finished tool trapped inside it.
Like Michelangelo seeing the statue in the marble?
Exactly. You have to carefully plan your strikes. You have to flake off material from both sides to create a symmetrical bifacial edge. That implies they held a complex cognitive template in their minds.
They are sculpting. They are engineering.
They are. These hand axes were essentially the Swiss army knife of the Pleistocene. The arsenal included stone axes, knives, early pickaxes, cleavers. They use them for everything from preparing food and butchering carcasses to cutting wood.
But the source mentions something even more advanced found all the way out in Java. Bolas.
The bolas are fascinating.
I actually had to look this up because I couldn't picture it. It is stones tied to a string.
It is a sophisticated projectile weapon. Imagine 2 or 3 heavy, rounded stones, securely connected by leather cords or woven plant vines. You grab one end, you spin the whole apparatus over your head to build momentum, and you throw it at the legs of a running animal.
Like a cowboy's lasso.
Similar physical principle, yes. When the cord hits the animal's legs, the heavy stone weights keep moving forward, causing the cord to wrap tightly around the legs. It either trips the animal while it's running, or it completely pins it down.
That requires sophisticated physics to pull off.
Yeah.
You need to intuitively understand centrifugal force, you need to balance the stone weights perfectly, and you need to actually manufacture strong enough cordage to hold it all together.
Right. It implies they were processing plant fibers or animal sinew. It implies they understood complex mechanics. This isn't just a brute randomly swinging a club. This is a highly skilled hunter executing a design.
But the biggest tool, the absolute ultimate game changer for them, was fire.
The mastery of fire. And I really want to emphasize the word mastery here.
Because plenty of animals use fire in a passive way, right? I have read about birds in Australia that pick up burning twigs from wildfires to flush out insects.
Right, lots of animals display opportunistic use of natural fire. If lightning strikes a tree, they might use the warmth or scavenge the roasted animals. But Homo erectus are the very first ancestors to control and actively create fire.
The create part is the massive headline.
It changes everything. We have evidence from sites in Kenya that suggests they were actively striking certain rocks, like iron pyrite, to create sparks. They were identifying specific slow-burning materials, like certain types of fungi, to transport embers from one camp to the next.
Once you have fire on demand, you are basically a wizard in that world.
You completely change the rules of the biological game. First off, you have warmth. That instantly explains how they managed to survive migrating up to Germany and northern China. You can create your own microclimate wherever you go.
And second,
Protection. Lions, saber-toothed, giant hyenas, they all absolutely terrified of fire. A campfire is essentially a glowing force field against predators.
which means you can sleep on the ground. You don't have to hide in the trees anymore.
Exactly. And the third massive benefit of fire, the kitchen.
Cooking. I feel like we constantly underestimate this. We tend to think of cooking purely as culinary, making things taste good with salt and herbs. But biologically speaking, it is a hack, isn't it?
It is the ultimate metabolic hack. Think about a raw potato or a massive chunk of raw antelope meat. It is incredibly tough. You have to chew it for hours just to break it down. Your stomach has to produce massive amounts of acid and burn a ton of energy to digest it.
And even then, you do not extract all the calories from it.
Highly inefficient. But if you take that same food and cook it, you fundamentally alter the chemistry. You denature the tight proteins in the meat. You gelatinize the complex starches in the roots. You are basically pre-digesting the food outside of your body.
So when you finally eat it, your body has to do a fraction of the work to get way more energy.
Exactly. And where does all that newly unlocked surplus energy go? It goes straight upstairs to the brain. The human brain is a massive energy hog. It uses about 20% of our daily calories, even when we are just sitting around. We biologically could not afford a brain this big if we were still eating tough, raw food all day like a gorilla. Homo erectus cooking their dinner around the campfire is literally what paid for the biological upgrade to Homo sapiens.
It is a perfect feedback loop. Better stone tools and the mastery of fire lead to a vastly better calorie-dense diet, which leads to a bigger, smarter brain, which then leads to even better tools and hunting strategies.
And it completely changed their role in the food web. Homo habilis was largely a scavenger. They were the little guys waiting in the bushes for the lions and the vultures to finish eating so they could crack open the leftover bones for marrow.
Just scraping by.
Literally. But Homo erectus, they were apex predators.
The menu listed in the source material is incredibly robust. Antelope, swine, wild cattle. But then the source explicitly mentions megagame.
Elephants, rhinoceroses,
Yeah.
hippos.
I just want to pause and try to visualize that scenario. You are an erectus hunter. You are maybe 5'10". You have a wooden spear with a sharpened stone tip. And you are looking at an aggressive creature that weighs 4 tons. How do you even approach that?
You do not do it alone. Never. And this is exactly where the complex social aspect comes in. Hunting megagame implies high-level teamwork. You absolutely need a squad. You need a coordinated plan. You go left, I go right, we make noise here, we drive the rhino toward the muddy swamp where it gets stuck.
It requires advanced strategy and foresight.
And unbelievable courage. But mostly it relies on strict coordination.
But they weren't just pure meat eaters, right? The source calls them hunter-gatherers and points out a specific site in Israel called Gesher Benot Yaak.
Yes, that site is an absolute archaeological treasure trove. The evidence there showed the consumption of over 50 different types of fruits, vegetables, nuts, and seeds.
50 types. That is a vastly more varied diet than I have right now. I think I cycle through the same 3 vegetables every single week.
They were master botanists. They had to be. If the elephant herds moved on or the antelope were scarce, they needed to know exactly which roots in the ground were edible, how to process them, and which ones would drop you dead.
And the source also mentions they ate aquatic foods.
Fish, turtles, amphibians. And yes, crocodiles.
Crocodiles. They were hunting crocodiles.
It shows they were successfully exploiting absolutely every single niche in their environment. If it had calories, Homo erectus figured out a method to kill it, harvest it, or dig it up. Intelligence, not just brute physical strength, is what put them firmly at the top in the food web.
Okay, so this level of intense coordination, hunting giant elephants, processing 50 types of plants, maintaining and moving fire, it raises the really big question, the one everyone always wants to know about ancient humans. Did they speak?
The million-dollar paleoanthropology question.
You cannot really coordinate a complex rhino ambush with just random grunts and pointing, can you? Just grunting and waving a spear seems like a good way to get trampled.
It does seem highly improbable. And the source points to a very specific, very rare piece of fossil evidence regarding this. The hyoid bone found in Castel di Guido, Italy.
The hyoid bone, that is the little floating bone in the throat.
Correct. It sits in the neck and it anchors the muscles of the tongue and the larynx. Now, in chimps and other great apes, the hyoid is shaped kind of like a little box, which physically limits the complex range of sounds they can make. But in this specific Homo erectus specimen from Italy, the bone was bar-shaped.
Bar-shaped like ours.
Very human-like. This anatomical shape suggests that the mechanical capacity, the physical hardware for speech, was indeed present. However,
There is always a however in fossil hunting.
always, the bone lacked the deep, microscopic muscle impressions that we modern humans have on our hyoids. We have those distinct impressions because we never, ever stop talking. Our tongues are doing incredibly complex gymnastics all day long, pulling on that bone. The Homo erectus bone just didn't show that level of constant, complex, high-strain usage.
So the hardware was installed in the throat, but the software wasn't fully running yet.
That is a perfect analogy. The general conclusion drawn in the sources is that they highly likely had a proto-language.
What does a proto-language sound like?
Well, it wasn't Shakespeare. It wasn't complex grammar or future tense or abstract philosophy, but it was definitely articulate. Think of distinct, human-like sounds and early words. Rock, run, elephant, fire here, danger there.
A highly functional speech.
Exactly. Enough to survive the Pleistocene. Enough to teach a child how to nap and a Schulian hand axe.
And speaking of living together and teaching, they weren't just wandering aimlessly and sleeping in the dirt. They were actually building things. The source mentions early shelter and architecture.
Yes, actual physical dwellings in places like Germany, France, and the Czech Republic, We find the first basic evidence of this.
What are we talking about here? Finding an empty cave.
No, not just claiming caves, constructed huts. The evidence points to structures roughly 3 meters by 4 meters in size.
So about 10 by 13 feet. The decent-sized room.
Right, and they were using branch roofs supported by thick wooden poles that they wedged tightly into rock or mud bases to keep them stable.
That sounds like a legitimate house.
It is a home base.
Yeah.
It means they weren't just nomadic wanderers sleeping wherever they happened to fall when the sun went down. They had a distinct destination, a safe place to protect the sick, to rear the young, to keep the elders warm. They were building camps to protect themselves from winter snow and harsh rain.
And here is where the story gets really interesting, or maybe just a little spooky. Because in these environments, we start to see the first tiny sparks of what we might genuinely call culture, or even art. The source spent some time on something called the Venus of Tantan.
Ah, yes, the Venus. This is a fascinating artifact.
It sounds mysterious. What exactly is it?
It's a very small piece of quartzite stone found in Morocco, and it dates back roughly 500,000 years. Now, purely naturally, the rock happens to look a bit like a human figure. It has a bulb that looks like a head and natural grooves that look like arms and legs.
So it's just a coincidence of geology. Pareidolia.
That is exactly what the heavy skeptics say. But microscopic analysis of the stone shows that some of those natural grooves were intentionally accentuated. Someone, an Erectus, took a harder stone tool and carefully carved into the natural lines to make it look even more human. And crucially, it was covered in traces of red ochre.
They painted it.
It seemingly did. This highly suggests a profound spark of self-consciousness and creativity. Imagine an Erectus walking along, seeing a shape in a raw rock, and having the cognitive leap to think, that looks like me, and then spending hours enhancing it. That is the birth of abstraction. That is the very beginning of art.
And what about the red ochre itself? Was it just for the little statue?
We actually find entire caches of it at different sites. They were actively collecting this pigment and grinding it up. It was highly likely used for body paint or some sort of social activity,
So they were decorating themselves.
which implies a deep sense of self and group identity. I am me, you are you, and I look different today because I'm wearing the red paint for the hunt or the ritual. It is the beginning of complex social identity.
But then the source material pivots to the darker side of this complex behavior, the potential ritual or survival aspects. It brings up the famous Peking man skulls found in China.
Yes, this is a much more grisly detail from the Zucudian cave system. The early excavations there produced many Homo erectus skulls, but very few other skeletal bones from the neck down. And many of those skulls were found completely smashed at the base.
Smashed open. And the running theory mentioned in the text is cannibalism.
Specifically, the intentional killing and breaking open of the skulls to consume the brains inside.
Yikes, that is a dark turn.
It is. Now, we have to be scientifically careful here. Some paleontologists strongly argue this was merely the work of giant Pleistocene hyenas. Those animals absolutely have jaws strong enough to crush a hominid skull like a walnut to get the fat inside.
Okay, so it could just be predators dragging them into the cave. But what is the other side of the argument?
The other side points out that the specific breakage patterns on the bone look suspiciously like intentional stone tool marks, not random teeth.
If it was other humans doing it, why? Just pure hunger.
It could absolutely be basic nutrition.
Yeah.
Brain tissue is incredibly high in fat and calories, which is vital in a harsh winter environment. But it could also be ritualistic behavior. In many much later human cultures throughout history, consuming the remains of respected ancestors or defeated enemies is a deeply spiritual way to absorb their power or their spirit.
So if Homo erectus was doing this, even 500,000 years ago, it suggests a complexity of belief. Whether they were doing it just for pure calories or for some dark symbolic ritual, it is an undeniably human type of behavior.
It is both fascinating and terrifying. It really paints a picture of a creature that is incredibly complex. They aren't just animals acting on blind biological instinct anymore. They're making distinct choices. Choices about art, about building shelter, about community, and maybe even choices about life and death rituals.
And they were making all of these complex choices in a world that was actively trying to kill them every single day. We really have to talk about the environment they were walking through.
Section 7 of the Deep Dive. The World of Monsters.
I genuinely love this part of the outline because the fauna list is just insane. We think of the wilderness today as dangerous, but it doesn't compare.
It really was a world of absolute monsters. We think of lions and grizzly bears today as scary, and they are. But the Pleistocene epoch was an entirely different weight class of predators and prey.
Let's run through the gauntlet they faced. In Africa, right out of the gate, they are dealing with Paleoloxodon.
Giant, straight-tusked elephants, much larger than modern African elephants.
And then there is Homotherium.
The scimitar-toothed cat. Notice I didn't say saber-tooth, I said scimitar-tooth.
What is the functional difference?
Saber-tooths, like Smilodon, were heavily built ambush predators with massive, fragile fangs. Homotherium was different. These cats were roughly the size of modern lions, but they had longer front legs and shorter back legs. They were built for long-distance running and endurance. And they hunted in coordinated packs. Imagine a massive pack of heavily armed lions that can run all day long without tiring, roaming the exact same open grass that you were trying to cross. A lone Homo erectus out foraging was just a quick snack for them.
And the source also mentions Cybotherium, which was this massive, bulky relative of the giraffe, and Cubanocuurus, which is just a nightmare-inducing giant forest hog with a horn on its head.
Yes, Africa was highly lethal.
But then they migrate to Europe. Does it get any easier?
Not at all. In Europe, you have bizarre things like Trogontherium, the giant beaver.
A giant beaver? That sounds almost cute, to be honest.
That sounds cute. Until a beaver the size of a black bear violently defends its territory and bites your leg off. But the real armored tank of the European landscape was the woolly rhinoceros, Coelodonta.
Describe that encounter for the listeners, because the outline specifically asks us to picture a pioneer locking eyes with one.
Well, imagine you are a Homo erectus pioneer. You have just walked generations from the warm Iberian Peninsula up into ancient Germany. It is misty, the ground is frozen, it's freezing cold, you are wearing animal skins. Suddenly, you hear a massive, deep rumble, and stepping out of the dense fog comes a 2-ton, highly aggressive rhinoceros, covered entirely in thick, shaggy fur, swinging a solid keratin horn that is literally as long as your arm. And all you have in your hand is a sharpened wooden stick and a piece of knapped flint.
That requires a level of bravery, or maybe just sheer madness that I honestly cannot comprehend.
And then, if we move over to Asia, we reach the ultimate boss battle of the Pleistocene.
Gigantopithecus.
The single largest primate to ever walk the earth.
The source mentions this was a distant relative of the modern orangutan.
Yes, but massively scaled up. Current paleontological estimates put a large male Gigantopithecus at nearly 10 feet tall when standing up and weighing well over 1,000 pounds.
10 feet tall. So you literally have the upright man, Homo erectus, standing in a bamboo forest looking up at a real-life King Kong.
Exactly. They lived in the exact same dense forests in southern China. We actually find their fossilized teeth and bones in the very same cave systems. They absolutely encountered each other and competed for the same resources.
That physical encounter must have been just mind-bending. The incredibly smart, relatively small human facing off against this towering giant beast.
It really puts their evolutionary success in perspective, doesn't it? Homo erectus conquered this terrifying world not because they were the biggest or the fastest or the strongest animal out there. They conquered it because they were smart, they had mastered fire, and most importantly, they had each other. Their social structure was their ultimate weapon.
And it worked. It worked better than almost any other strategy in history. The timeline shows they ruled the Earth for roughly 2 million years. That is a staggeringly long run. I mean, Homo sapiens, us, we've only been around for what, maybe 300,000 years?
About that, yes.
So Homo erectus had a global dynasty that completely dwarfs ours. They were the undisputed champions for millions of years. But, as the outline points out, eventually the era ended.
It did. Though they persisted until surprisingly recently. The fossil record shows they were still hanging on about 100,000 years ago in parts of Java.
So what finally took them out? Was it a meteor? A disease?
The classic evolutionary culprit? Climate change? But not quite the way we usually think of it today. The world didn't just globally get incredibly hot or plunge into a sudden ice age. The specific vegetation patterns changed drastically.
How so?
The open woodlands and the vast grassy savannas that they absolutely loved and were perfectly adapted for began to transform. Especially over in Southeast Asia, the climate shifted, and those open spaces were swallowed up by incredibly dense, thick rainforests.
And they just couldn't adapt to the jungle. They started there, didn't they?
They did, but they had spent 2 million years specializing in open ground. Remember their anatomy. They were long-distance runners. Their entire hunting strategy relied on clear sightlines, tracking herds, and running prey to exhaustion over miles of open terrain. In a dense, tangled rainforest, you cannot run prey down. You can't even see 20 feet in front of you. The entire game is different.
So their greatest strength became useless.
Homo erectus simply couldn't pivot their technology and hunting style fast enough to survive the changing flora. The environment that literally shaped their bodies eventually evicted them.
Adapt or die. And this time, after 2 million years of winning, they couldn't adapt.
Right. But we have to make it clear, they didn't just vanish without a trace. They didn't just blink out of existence. They left descendants.
We are the legacy.
We absolutely are. Homo erectus didn't just go extinct in a vacuum. They actively evolved. The populations that were isolated in Europe adapted to the cold and eventually evolved into Homo heidelbergensis. And heidelbergensis eventually gave rise to the Neanderthals.
And what about the populations that stayed back in Africa?
They continued to refine their brains and bodies, and eventually they evolved into us, Homo sapiens. We are quite literally the 2.0 version of their operating system.
And the outline mentions something really wild about island evolution, too. The hobbits.
Yes, this is arguably one of my favorite footnotes in all of human history. Some adventurous populations of Homo erectus managed to get stuck on isolated islands, like Flores in Indonesia.
And what happens when a big, active hunter gets trapped on a small island?
The island rule of biology takes over. Because land and caloric resources were severely limited on the island, evolution favored smaller bodies that needed less food. Over thousands of years, these Homo erectus shrank. They became a distinct species known as Homo floresiensis, often nicknamed the hobbits.
Tiny humans.
Roughly 3 feet tall as full-grown adults, still walking upright, still making complex stone tools, and actively hunting tiny dwarfed elephants that also lived on the island. And the crazy part is they survived until maybe 50,000 years ago. They were the very last lingering echo of the great Homo erectus expansion.
So in a very real way, Homo erectus is the grandfather of almost all later human species.
Without a doubt. If we somehow met them today, standing on the street in that bespoke suit, despite the heavy brow ridges and the lack of complex Shakespearean sentences, we would fundamentally recognize their humanity. We would see the raw emotion in their eyes, the deep intelligence, the care for their young.
We are the direct biological and technological legacy of their endless innovations.
Every single time you flick a plastic lighter to start a fire, or use a steel knife in your kitchen, or build a shelter from the rain, you are utilizing concepts and tools that they painstakingly pioneered through trial and error.
That is an incredibly powerful thought to end on. From a small, isolated, struggling group in the African Rift Valley to conquering the entire globe, mastering the magic of fire, and becoming the very first true people.
It is, without exaggeration, the greatest success story of the Pleistocene.
And the source material leaves us with a really provocative thought for the listeners to mull over. It asks us to look at the timeline. Homo erectus reigned supreme for 2 million years. They looked giant killer apes and woolly rhinos in the eye and won. But eventually the global climate shifted, the forests grew thick, and they couldn't keep up.
It really does make you look in the mirror. We modern humans pride ourselves immensely on our technological adaptability. We think we can engineer our way out of anything.
But Homo erectus was the absolute master of adaptation for their time, and even they eventually hit a biological wall.
Exactly. If our own climate shifts as drastically as theirs did, and our environment fundamentally changes, will our species manage to last 2 million years? It is a humbling question.
That is the big question. So next time you sit around a campfire, or just pick up a simple tool to fix something in your house, take a second to remember the upright man. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
Keep wondering.